Lesson 16, Manipura Chakra. The city of jewels. Manipura Chakra is a very important chakra to understand. Manipura Chakra is responsible for providing our whole being with energy. You can consider Manipura Chakra to be the energy plant or the sun, hence the name Manipura, city of jewels, always shining, always glittering. Manipura Chakra, we have called it the fire center. The fire is the subtle element of this chakra for a reason. I think I mentioned when we talked about staying one bow shot away from earth, water and fire, in relation to fire, I mentioned that actually indulging in the comfort of heat, like floor heating for example, can be rather detrimental, can be rather damaging to the functioning of Manipura Chakra. I, in the past, had a member in one of our yoga classes who always looked very miserable, very sad, very tamas also. You understand tamas? Very dark, gray, lacking energy, weak. In a rather extreme way. So she opened up to me about her condition and explained that she visited various doctors, and doctors didn't seem to understand what was wrong with her. So, having talked with her several times and felt her condition, I came to the conclusion that she was lacking energy. And so I asked her about her use of floor heating. And she told me that as a therapy, she also in the summer would lie down on an electric mat. And that is when the light went on. That is when I realized that what she thought was therapy was actually the cause of her ailments. Very weak, pain everywhere, depressed, gloomy, dark. All the signs of total lack of energy. So I explained to her about Manipura Chakra and about the danger of heat destroying Manipura Chakra. Ironically, she told me the mat that she uses, electric mat, was very expensive, implying that it is very good quality, so it can't be bad. So very sad. After I explained the principle of Manipura Chakra, that it's responsible for our overall energy household, energy production, and that tapas or austerity is the way to strengthen that chakra so that we possess more energy rather than less, she didn't believe it. She didn't accept it. Thinking that the mat is therapeutic, so it can't be bad. Especially because it was high quality based on the high price that she paid for it. But this is how it works. That's why tapas, or the practice of austerity also, is important to understand. Don't put it into practice in extreme ways that it ends up becoming torture. But we need to move. We need to allow Manipura Chakra to do its work. If we take that away from Manipura Chakra simply becomes lazy. And so the light of Manipura Chakra becomes dim. And that has many implications in terms not only physical health, but also mental health. Good ways to keep Manipura Chakra shining, in good health, producing energy, is simply to exercise, move. The Tumo yogis do it mentally by intensely concentrating on the chakra. But if you don't meditate or don't meditate often, just a firm walk is really good for Manipura Chakra's health. And it is an important chakra because it provides all other chakras with energy too. It is the energy plant in our whole being. So if Manipura Chakra is not functioning well, everything else is not functioning well as a consequence of that. The subtle element, the tammatra of this chakra, of course, is fire. So you have earth for Muladhara, water for Svadhisthana, and fire for Manipura. The Karmendriya, subtle vehicle of action here, is motion or propulsion. Propulsion is movement, all motion of the physical body. The subtle organ of perception is sight. Each of the chakras, the lower 5 chakras, is related to Jnanendriya, or an organ of perception. So we had smell for Muladhara, taste for Svadhisthana, and here you have eyesight, the eyes. The subtle energy is simply prana. So we had apana prana, samana prana. Here is just prana, generic prana. It's the prana that is the foundation for all the other pranas or sub-pranas. Hence, it's simply called prana, without any addition. The color belonging to this chakra is yellow, and the mantra is Ram. Manipura Chakra has a developmental stage, or is mostly dominant during the time frame between the age of 15 and 21. It explains why teenagers go through puberty, which is accompanied by rebellion, by stubbornness. It is the time for the government to call you up for military service. Because during the time, boys in that developmental stage They're ready to fight. They're ready to battle, to conquer. You draft older men for military service, war breaks out, they'll probably smoke a cigarette with the enemy and have a good conversation. Young boys, they grab the gun and they just want to win. So older men usually are in a role of leadership, generals, admirals and what have you. Young boys, they have to crawl through the mud and kill, basically. It is the time in which we establish our identity, which explains puberty. You want to be accepted, but most of all you need also to accept yourself. Establish your identity. It's the time of putting your foot down, even to the extent of being very unreasonable. Now, parents who understand it, they just let their teenage kids be. It's just a period, and my mom would always say, "Oh, it will pass." And in the meantime, you are boiling, because when your mom says, "Oh, it will pass," you become even angrier at that time. Later, you understand, and you give your mom a big hug for all the misery that you gave her. Manipura Chakra is crucial in everything we do. Every impulse, physically, verbally, or mentally, starts with a whirl of energy in Manipura Chakra. So those exercises that we do, the boat poses, the leg raise, and Mayurasana. Mayurasana is the ultimate fire pose. That's why we started playing with that pose. These exercises are designed to control the fire. So now I see a mosquito, my Manipura Chakra is exploding, and I'm just controlling my attitude. I don't know for how long. But the importance of control of Manipura Chakra is enormous. If you drive a car and you're not in control of Manipura Chakra, check YouTube. If you watch YouTube and you watch videos of accidents, you will see that most accidents could have been avoided if people had only been in control of Manipura Chakra. What happens? You are driving, in the corner of your eye you see something or you become aware of something, and in a moment, in a knee-jerk reaction, you turn the wheel in an uncontrolled way and you crash into the barrier, or you crash into another car, or you push the accelerator. It all starts in Manipura Chakra. If you are in control of Manipura Chakra, you're driving, something, the mosquito is eating, something happens and you react, but you immediately take control. I've experienced this many times because I've been driving since I was 13 years old and become aware of how this works studying yoga. Never had an accident all those years driving. You drive, you notice something, and where another person would jerk the wheel in an uncontrolled way, you are starting to jerk, and before you can actually do any damage, you control that jerk. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So you avoid crashing into the barrier or another car because something startled you, something unexpected shocked you. So control of Manipura Chakra not only helps you to a large extent to avoid avoidable accidents, it helps you to avoid conflict. Because all conflicts start in Manipura Chakra. It's always an issue of action-reaction. The one who is in control of Manipura Chakra puts an end to that process where reaction follows upon action. To teach you this, your mom or maybe your dad taught you to count to 10 when you were a child and you got upset or angry about something. Count to 10 or take a deep breath. What happens when you do that is you take the sting out of the situation, the sudden occurring emotion that explodes. Not only that, it allows you to gain some oversight in what is happening and why it is happening. And it dampens or reduces the emotion that leads to a knee-jerk reaction considerably. You can see, by the way, countries that have no driving culture. Korea was a country like that. When I came to Korea in the 1990s, Korea had just started driving on a massive scale just for a couple of years only. Before that, having a car was limited to only rich people. So when people started driving on a massive scale for the very first time, with the first generation that ever started to drive, traffic was crazy, with people going far beyond the speed limit, driving like crazy, and leading also to terrible accidents. So when you are a member of Korean expat Facebook groups, you see a lot of complaints about traffic in Korea, but that is not the reality anymore. People who still complain about it are still stuck in what happened 20, 25 years ago. Korea now has a driving culture and people are courteous. Of course, some things go wrong here and there, but in the Netherlands, some things goes wrong here and there also. And in the US, in Russia, in Germany, also things go wrong. What am I talking about is, of course, learning to control Manipura Chakra. The first generation that starts driving has no control at all yet over Manipura Chakra where it comes to driving cars. It makes a huge difference. Every movement you initiate, every word you speak, every action, reaction starts with a whirl of energy in Manipura Chakra. That is why Manipura Chakra is so important. The most important, of course, to gradually learn to control it, understand how it works, and learn to control it. Last week we jokingly said, pay attention what happens when you need to go to the toilet. Why? Because of energy. Become aware of the energy and you will start to notice the energy that is involved in Manipura Chakra. Because you were born with that energy, you've never consciously noticed. So we think that it is subtle. But once you're aware of it, it's not subtle at all. Manipura Chakra is also the cause of young people rioting. People rioting, throwing stones at the police or other authorities. It's always people in that age range, between 15 and 21 years old. Of course, can always be some younger boys involved, sometimes a little bit older, but the majority of people rioting in the West Bank, for example, or anywhere where there is unrest in the streets, always people in this age range. I'm not talking about protesting, I'm talking about rioting. The two seem to be the same, but protesting is something that people do in the next developmental stage, between 22 and 28. We will come to that next week. The rioting is accompanied by violence, without concern of the consequences of it. Burning, looting, hurting, harming other people, damaging property, etc. The protesting is different. Yeah, page 2, third paragraph, you see something about an old Roman expression that is in fact a means of going about Manipura Chakra in a healthy way. And to do that, they presented us with something that seems like a total contradiction. The old Romans, they said, festina lente. Lente means slow. Festina means hurry. So festina lente means hurry slowly. How is that possible? You see in the illustration a hare in the front whose rear body is the house of a snail. What does it mean, festina lente? It means avoid hurry, avoid stress. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the course when we talked about arriving in time. That does not only, coming late does not only affect the class, of course, but it affects you. When you're late, there are many thoughts and feelings racing through you that wreak havoc inside you. So, in order to follow the advice of the Romans, festina lente, you need to leave home in time, so that you don't have to feel rushed, stressed, worried, because you might end up coming late or miss something. It's all about Manipura Chakra, managing of Manipura Chakra. If it is correct, that is a development that will naturally take place, because you will become more and more sensitive. And you are doing the fire poses which cause a stress reaction in you. That's why I said deliberately and many times, remain playful when you undergo these fire poses. Approach it in a playful way. Control, stay calm and controlled. Even smile while undergoing the strain of the poses. One of the big secrets in yoga is very simple. It's about attitude. More specific, it's about control of attitude. You control attitude, you control energy. That is what it means, that when confronted with a stressful situation, that you choose to stay calm and controlled. It's a choice that you make, must make. You do that in a playful way on your yoga mat, doing a boat pose, raising your legs, Mayurasana. But then you find naturally this ability integrating into daily life situations. At home, at work, in a busy subway or bus, etc. The things that you do in a superficial way on your mat become very practically available, integrate into your daily life situations. Manipura chakra has two secondary chakras. We call them secondary chakras. They are the organs, the liver and the spleen. Most of the organs that are around, in and around the belly, we call fire organs. And they are related to digestion in one way or another. The liver is Surya chakra, which means sun, while the spleen is called Chandra chakra, which is the moon. The reason why they are opposites is that when you are lacking energy, the spleen kicks in to support Manipura chakra to produce more energy. You notice this when you just had a meal and then engage in exercising. If you just had a meal without digestion, you start engaging in sports, you feel a pinch in your side, which is the spleen kicking in. Because digestion, especially after a proper meal, that is an activity that absorbs a lot of energy, that requires a lot of energy. So the proper way to digest a proper meal is to take time, quiet time for an hour or so to allow the food to settle and digest for a large part. The liver does the opposite. When we have too much energy, too many calories, the liver then kicks in to get rid of those calories. This happens particularly when you drink alcohol, especially when you drink a little bit too much alcohol. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, you wake up with a sweat. That is the liver emitting excess heat, leading to the sweating. It's not hot, the room is not hot, the bed is not hot, but you wake up in a sweat. Maybe you would call it a cold sweat. It's the body getting rid of all the excess calories from the alcohol that you consumed the evening before. And it typically happens around 5 o'clock in the morning, between 4 and 6. Manipura chakra is the location of ego and also ambition. If you have too much ambition, if you pursue your goals with too much ambition, it can lead to stomach ulcers. It can lead to heart problems, diseases caused by stress. So ambition is not necessarily a bad thing, just like ego is not necessarily a bad thing. What matters is how we deal with it. Without ambition, nothing is achieved in life. So ambition is a motivator, is a fuel. But ambition needs to be handled in a sensible way, in a reasonable way. It's the same with ego. When you read about spirituality, and when you hear teachers talking about spirituality, they often give the impression that ego is something that you can get rid of. The ego must die, they say, which gives the impression that you can basically turn it off, switch it off, eliminate it. Is that true? Ego is the foundation of you. So ego is always with you. But ego is like wine. If there is too much of it, it becomes a poison. If it is controlled, then it becomes beneficial. People with big ego, because you have big ego or not, they can achieve great things in life. They will be led to achieve great things in life. If that ego is under control, it leads to very beneficial developments. The boss of a company is always somebody with a big ego, otherwise he would never have reached that position. If that ego is uncontrolled, it leads to arrogance, it leads to abuse, it leads to a bad atmosphere in the company, and eventually it affects the productivity of the people working there, and of course it will then automatically affect the profitability of the company. What happens if you work for such a boss? You probably have experienced this in your life at some point. You don't want to be there, but you go there because you need your salary at the end of the month. You continue to go there only because of that. But you're constantly looking at the clock. When is coffee time? When is lunchtime? When is time to go home? And also, the turnover in personnel is usually rather high. People leave often, and so the company constantly has to hire new people. Not only that, they have to train them. A company with a boss with a big ego that is in control, it leads to harmony. People working in that company feel appreciated. They feel like belonging to a family. As a result, they're motivated, productivity is high, people stay, so the turnover in personnel is low. People stay, are loyal, and automatically the company is profitable. So you see this on all levels. If you have a family and the father has a big ego that is not under control, the wife and the children are all suffering. If the father has a big ego and the ego is under control, it can be the mother also, but often it is the father that causes that influence. The ego is under control, everybody is thriving. Everybody's happy, and as a result, everybody is doing well. The children are doing good in school, everybody happy to go to work and come home again and eat together and play together. So it has huge consequences. And you see it also with leaders, politicians. Politicians are politicians because they have a big ego. If that ego is under control, it leads to good international relationships. National and international. And the opposite, of course. If the ego is not under control, it leads to conflict, chaos. In the worst case scenario, it leads to war. All wars were started because of lack of control of ego. And on a personal scale, every conflict that we have can be avoided if we control ego. You may, of course, argue, yeah, but it's not fair. That's true. But even if it's not fair, conflict always makes things worse. Try to make a sport out of it. Play with ego, like we play with the boat poses. And next time we're confronted with a situation where normally conflict would occur, try to avoid it. You will see what happens. In the emotion, you may feel you need to fight, to stand up for yourself, stand up for your right. You think that the conflict is part of how you need to interact with those people. But look what happens if next time you are able to avoid it. When the emotion dies down, you will feel so good about yourself. It's so much promoting sense of self-respect. Conflict, even if you win the conflict, very often leads to an internal conflict. Because you feel that you behaved stupid, or uncontrolled, or too emotional. Being able to control ego and avoid conflict, that feels so good. The ability to be in control. And at first you will say, yeah, but it's not fair and I should protect my right and what have you. Yes, but the conflict doesn't solve the problem. So avoiding the conflict is already a big win in itself. And often the cause of the conflict cannot be eliminated. You just have to take sensible steps to maneuver around it, or to deal with it in another way, or to just avoid having to deal with that person in one way or another. But the conflict always makes things unnecessarily complicated. It causes more suffering. Good? Questions?
I have a question. When do you think conflict is like necessary? Or are you saying you don't think it's ever necessary?
When is conflict necessary? If somebody tries to kill you, if somebody, that is very subjective. The answer that I give is very extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a consideration you have to make when confronted with the situation. But in almost all cases it can be avoided. But being non-violent does not mean that when somebody tries to kill you, you allow that to happen because you sing Om and you're non-violent. The Bible says that you should turn your other cheek. But that is not correct. What is correct is that when confronted with violence, you sometimes have to step up to stem the violence. But that means that violence needs to be very measured and controlled. If somebody punches you in the face, maybe you have to wrestle him down to the ground and immobilize that person. But if on top of that, you then start pounding away, breaking the person's nose and what have you, then you go overboard. You don't turn the other cheek, but you don't engage in uncontrolled violence. So it's easy to talk about the principles that we discuss. Putting it into practice is often much more complicated, and the only one to judge that is you. And how do you determine? Simply by trial and error. From now on, you are a yogi. That means everything you do in life, you do mindfully, consciously. So you always reflect on what happened, how it happened, why it happened, but also what the consequences are. And based on that, you become wiser. Based on that, you become more experienced, and it helps you to make a better decision next time. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just learn from it. Also in this respect, in respect of conflicts. Okay, let's have a short break. Wait. One more thing about this issue. Because if you talk about conflict, war, violence, you talk about armies, right? So there are people advocating getting rid of the army. Is that a reasonable thing to do? No. If you look at the current state of affairs in the world, there is a certain balance that is only possible because a group of nations is very well equipped militarily. It leads to peace. If this group of countries would not be well equipped militarily, other countries would start wars that would lead to incredible suffering around the world. And in fact, the situation has been like that up until the previous century. The world has always been a hotbed full of war. Europe has been always at war until the Second World War. And then they overlooked the carnage, the slaughter, because weapons get better and better. Tactics become better and better to the point that we started killing each other on a very large scale. And wise people then said, let's join hands. Let's try to control our egos, in our words. Let's create bodies where we deal with our conflicts and our issues, so that we never ever have to have a war anymore. Europe is an experiment that has led to decades of peace among countries, many countries, that for hundreds of years have been in an eternal war. So a strong army, expensive, sophisticated weapons in the hands of the right people lead to peace. That is, you have to have the possibility to defend yourself in case others want to come and disturb your peace. You try always to be non-violent, but Patanjali also says, I mentioned it before several times probably, because this is a very wise sutra of Patanjali. The misery that has not come can and must be avoided. In case of international relationships, that means be prepared for the worst. Just in case. Because history shows that the worst comes when you're not prepared. Strange as yogis to talk about war and violence and armies and so on. It's the reality of the world that we live in. Okay, let's have a short break.